Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., pulling Michael from the edge of sleep with the kind of jolt that sends adrenaline flooding through your veins before your mind can even process why. He grabbed for it in the darkness, knocking over the water glass on his nightstand. His wife Sarah stirred beside him but didn't wake. The screen showed Evelyn's name, and Michael's heart clenched. His daughter was on a school camping trip in Olympic National Park, 300 miles away. She wasn't supposed to call unless it was an emergency. Evelyn? His voice came out rough, sleep-thickened, and already afraid. What came through the speaker made every muscle in his body go rigid. It was Evelyn's voice, but wrong, high and thin and breaking with terror that no 16-year-old should ever have to feel. Dad. The word dissolved into a sob. Dad, please, you have to come get me. Something's wrong here. Something's really wrong and I can't. Static crackled across the line, and beneath it Michael heard something else. A sound like wind through trees, but deeper. Rhythmic. Almost like breathing. Evelyn, what's happening? Where are you? Michael was already out of bed, pulling on jeans with one hand. Sarah sat up, instantly alert in the way mothers become when they sense their child is in danger. The counselors. They're acting strange. Ms. Peterson, she just walked into the woods an hour ago and she's not back, and Mr. Harding won't let anyone go look for her. Dad, there are marks on the trees. These symbols, they're everywhere. And the other kids, some of them are acting like they're in a trance or something. Emily started speaking in a language none of us understand, and her eyes... Evelyn's voice cracked. Dad. Her eyes were completely black. Michael's hands had gone cold. Evelyn, listen to me. I need you to stay calm. Stay with the group. Don't go anywhere alone. I'm coming right now. Do you hear me? I'm getting in the car and... No! The desperation in her voice cut through him like a blade. Dad, you don't understand. It's the moon. When the moon is full, Mr. Harding kept saying it. 3 more nights. 3 more nights until the moon is full. Dad, I think they brought us here for something. I think we're not supposed to leave. The line went dead. Michael stared at the phone, his daughter's terrified voice still echoing in his ears. Sarah was already beside him, her face pale in the dim light filtering through their bedroom window. What happened? Is Evelyn okay? Get dressed, Michael said, his voice hard with decision. We're going to Olympic. Now? Michael, it's almost midnight. Now. He looked at his wife, and she must have seen something in his eyes because she didn't argue further. She'd been married to him for 18 years. She knew when he'd made up his mind, and she knew the tone he used when one of their children was in real danger. 15 minutes later, they were on I-5, heading north through the darkness. Sarah had called the school's emergency line 3 times. No answer. She'd called the ranger station at Olympic National Park. The ranger who answered sounded half asleep and told them all organized camping groups in the Hoh rainforest area had checked in properly that evening. Everything was fine. When Sarah pressed, asking about strange behavior or missing counselors, the ranger's tone had shifted to barely concealed annoyance. Worried parents always thought the worst. The kids were fine. They were in one of the safest parks in the country. Michael drove 15 miles over the speed limit, his hands tight on the wheel. He kept replaying Evelyn's call in his mind, the fear in her voice, the wrongness of it. His daughter was smart, level-headed. She didn't panic easily. If she was that scared, there was a reason. 3 more nights until the moon is full. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 12:34 a.m. If he was counting right, that meant the full moon would rise in 72 hours. Why would that matter? What did a full moon have to do with anything? Sarah was quiet beside him, staring out at the dark highway. Finally, she said, "Tell me exactly what she said." Michael recounted every word he could remember. When he got to the part about the symbols on the trees and the black eyes, Sarah's hand found his on the gear shift and squeezed tight. "We should call the police," she said. "And tell them what?" "Our daughter called saying the other kids are acting strange. They'll tell us the same thing the ranger did, that we're overreacting." "Then what do we do?" "We get there. We get her out. Then we figure out the rest." They drove through the night, stopping only once for gas and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber but at least kept Michael alert. By the time dawn broke gray and uncertain over the mountains, they were deep into the Olympic Peninsula, following increasingly narrow roads into the rainforest. The Hoh rainforest was one of the wettest places in the continental United States, receiving over 12 feet of rain annually. Michael had read that somewhere, maybe in the permission slip paperwork for Evelyn's trip. The trees here were massive ancient things, Sitka spruce and western hemlock that had been growing for centuries. Everything was draped in moss, thick and green and suffocating. The forest seemed to swallow sound, leaving only the drip of moisture and the occasional bird call that felt more lonely than alive. They reached the ranger station at 7:15 a.m. It was a small wooden building that looked like it had been there since the 1970s, surrounded by towering trees that made it seem even smaller. A battered pickup truck sat in the gravel parking lot, but no other vehicles. Inside, a different ranger sat behind a scarred wooden desk. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen more than they wanted to. Her nameplate read, Ranger Morrison. "Help you?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew why they were there and wasn't happy about it. "Our daughter is part of a school camping group that checked in yesterday," Michael said. "Jefferson High from Seattle. We need to know exactly where they're camped." Ranger Morrison's expression didn't change. "Parents aren't allowed to visit students during organized trips without prior authorization from the school. It disrupts the educational experience." "I don't give a damn about the educational experience," Michael said, his voice going hard. "My daughter called me last night terrified. She said one of the counselors went missing and the kids are acting strange. So you're going to tell me where that group is camping, or I'm going to walk into those woods and start searching myself." Something flickered across Morrison's face. Not surprise, something else. Something that looked almost like resignation. "Your daughter's name?" "Evelyn Carter. She's 16, brown hair, about 5'6". "I know which group you're talking about." Morrison stood slowly, moving to a large topographical map mounted on the wall behind her desk. "They're camped here." She tapped a spot deep in the rainforest, miles from any road. "Hoh River Trail, about 8 miles in. There's a designated camping area near the Olympus Guard Station ruins." "Ruins?" Sarah asked. "Old ranger station from the 1930s. Hasn't been used in decades. Just foundation stones and a few walls now. The camping area is nearby." Morrison turned back to them, and now Michael could see something in her eyes that made his skin crawl. Fear. The ranger was afraid. "How experienced are you with backcountry hiking?" "Experienced enough," Michael said, though it was mostly a lie. He'd done some hiking in his 20s, but nothing serious in years. "It's a difficult trail, muddy this time of year. Easy to get turned around if you don't know what you're doing." Morrison walked back to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a topographical map. She folded it and held it out. "Stay on the main trail. Don't deviate. The forest here, it's easy to get lost. People go missing in Olympic every year." The way she said it made Michael's blood run cold. "Has anyone else gone missing recently?" Sarah asked. "From other groups?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "No organized groups, but we've had 3 hikers disappear in the last month. Solo hikers, experienced backcountry people who knew what they were doing. We found one of them 5 days later." She paused. "Most of him, anyway." "What does that mean?" Michael demanded. "It means the wildlife here can be dangerous, Mr. Carter. Black bears, cougars. You need to be careful." But that wasn't what she'd meant. Michael could see it in her eyes. She was warning them about something else, something she either couldn't or wouldn't name directly. "The moon," Michael said suddenly. "Does the full moon mean anything? Is there something that happens here when—" "Take the map," Morrison interrupted, her voice sharp. Stay on the trail. If you're smart, you'll get your daughter and get out before nightfall. Don't camp out there. Don't stay after dark." She looked between them, and her next words came out quiet, almost a whisper. "And whatever you do, don't let them see you watching." "Let who see us?" But Morrison had already turned away, shuffling papers on her desk in a way that made it clear the conversation was over. Michael and Sarah left the ranger station with more questions than answers and a growing sense of dread that sat like lead in Michael's stomach. They geared up quickly. Backpacks with water, flashlights, first aid kit, extra clothing. Michael had a knife on his belt. It felt absurd and inadequate all at once. The trailhead was a 15-minute drive from the ranger station, down a rutted dirt road that ended at a small gravel parking area. 2 other vehicles were there, a white van with Jefferson High School painted on the side, and a dark green SUV that looked expensive and out of place in the wilderness setting. "That's not a school vehicle," Sarah observed, nodding at the SUV. Michael didn't answer. He was already shouldering his pack, checking the map one last time. 8 miles in. If they pushed hard, they could make it in 3 hours, maybe less. They started walking at 8:45 a.m. The Hoh rainforest was beautiful in the way that deep, ancient places are beautiful, overwhelming and indifferent to human presence. The trail wound between massive trees whose trunks were wider than cars. Everything was green, impossibly green. Layer upon layer of moss and ferns and undergrowth that seemed to pulse with life. The air was thick with moisture, carrying the smell of decomposition and growth all mixed together. For the first 2 miles, it was almost pleasant despite their urgency. The trail was well maintained, marked with blue blazes on the trees every 50 yards or so. They passed a few other hikers heading back toward the trailhead, a young couple with expensive camera equipment, an older man with a dog. Everyone exchanged the polite nods that hikers give each other. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, things began to change. It started with the silence. Gradually, over the course of the 3rd mile, Michael realized he couldn't hear birds anymore. The forest had gone quiet, except for their footsteps and breathing. Even the wind seemed to have died, leaving the air still and heavy. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice low. Michael did. There was a wrongness to the quiet, a sense of being watched that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He kept scanning the forest around them, but the undergrowth was too thick to see more than 20 or 30 feet in any direction. Then they found the first symbol. It was carved into the trunk of a massive Sitka spruce about 100 feet off the trail. Michael only spotted it because a shaft of light broke through the canopy and caught the raw wood where bark had been stripped away. The symbol was complex, made of intersecting lines and curves that formed a pattern his eyes couldn't quite hold on to. Looking at it made him dizzy. "Michael," Sarah breathed, and he turned to see her pointing at another tree. Same symbol, carved deep into the wood, and another tree beyond that, and another. The symbols surrounded them, dozens of them carved into trees in every direction. Some looked fresh, oozing sap. Others were older, the exposed wood gray and weathered. "Evelyn said she saw symbols," Sarah whispered. "On the trees." They kept walking, faster now. Michael's heart was hammering in his chest. The symbols appeared every 50 feet or so, always at the same height, about 7 feet up, well above where a human could comfortably reach. He tried not to think about what that meant. At the 4-mile mark, they found the first dead animal. It was a raccoon, or what was left of one. The body had been torn apart with savage violence, but the pieces were arranged in a deliberate pattern on the trail, a circle of fur and bone and meat that looked almost ritualistic. The blood was still fresh enough to be tacky. Sarah made a small sound of distress. Michael stepped around the circle carefully, pulling her along. His hand had gone to the knife at his belt without him consciously deciding to draw it. "We should turn back," Sarah said, but her voice was mechanical. They both knew they wouldn't. Evelyn was ahead, somewhere in this nightmare forest. They would not turn back. The trail climbed steadily, becoming steeper and more difficult. Michael's legs burned with the effort, his lungs working hard in the thick air. They'd been hiking for almost 3 hours when they rounded a bend and saw the camping area. It was a clearing about 50 yards across, hemmed in by massive trees on all sides. A small stream ran along the northern edge, its water dark and slow-moving. Several tents were set up in a rough circle, bright blue and orange synthetic fabric that looked absurdly cheerful against the gray-green gloom of the forest. But there were no people, no sounds of conversation or movement. The tents just sat there, silent and still as graves. "Evelyn!" Michael shouted, his voice cracking the oppressive quiet. Nothing. They moved into the clearing cautiously. As they got closer to the tents, Michael could see that some of them had been torn open, the fabric ripped in long gashes. Sleeping bags spilled out onto the muddy ground. A backpack lay on its side, contents scattered, clothes, a paperback book with a bent cover, a hairbrush. Sarah grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt. "Michael, look." Beyond the tents, partially hidden by the trees, stood the ruins of the old Olympus guard station. Most of it had collapsed decades ago, leaving only a foundation of moss-covered stones and part of one wall still standing. But scratched into every visible surface were those same symbols from the trees. Hundreds of them, layered over each other in a dizzying pattern. And standing in front of the ruins, arranged in a perfect line, were 7 people. Michael's heart lurched. He recognized 2 of them, Mr. Harding, the biology teacher who'd organized this trip, and Ms. Peterson, the counselor Evelyn said had walked into the woods. They stood absolutely still, facing the ruins, their backs to Michael and Sarah. The other 5 were students, teenagers in muddy outdoor gear. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, silent as statues. "Evelyn?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, are you here?" None of the figures moved. It was as if they hadn't heard her at all. Michael approached them slowly, his knife still in his hand, though he couldn't have said what good he thought it would do. As he got closer, he could see that all 7 figures were barefoot, their shoes and socks discarded in the mud. Their feet were cut and bleeding, but they didn't seem to notice or care. "Mr. Harding?" Michael said, coming up beside the biology teacher. "Mr. Harding? Where are the other students? Where's my daughter?" Harding didn't respond, didn't even blink. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the ruins with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. His lips moved slightly, and Michael realized he was whispering something. The same words over and over, too quiet to make out. Michael grabbed Harding's shoulder and shook him. "Where is Evelyn?" The teacher's head turned slowly, mechanically, until he was looking directly at Michael. His eyes were completely black, not the pupils but the entire eye, sclera and all, like someone had filled them with ink. When he spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. "The moon will be full in 3 nights. The offering must be ready." "What offering? What the hell are you talking about?" But Harding's eyes had already rolled back in his head and he swayed on his feet. Michael stepped back, horrified, as all 7 of the standing figures began to sway in unison, moving like trees in a wind that didn't exist. Then, from the forest beyond the ruins, Michael heard his daughter scream. He ran without thinking, crashing through the undergrowth toward the sound. Sarah was right behind him, calling Evelyn's name. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches tearing at their clothes and faces. Michael's lungs burned, his heart hammered, but he didn't slow down. He burst into another clearing, smaller than the first, and stopped so abruptly that Sarah slammed into his back. Evelyn was there. She was alive, thank God. She was alive. But she wasn't alone. His daughter stood in the center of the clearing, and surrounding her in a wide circle were at least 20 people. Some were teenagers from her school. Michael recognized a few faces from orientation nights and football games. Others were adults he didn't know. And standing at the far edge of the circle, dressed in hiking clothes but somehow looking like they belonged to a different time entirely, were 3 figures that made Michael's skin crawl. They were older, 2 men and a woman, with weathered faces and eyes that gleamed with an intelligence that felt predatory and wrong. The woman stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the clearing with unnatural clarity. "You're the girl's father," she said. "It wasn't a question. We've been waiting for you. Stay away from my daughter. Michael growled, moving toward Evelyn. But the circle of people stepped inward, blocking his path. Their movements were synchronized, inhuman. Several of them had those same black eyes he'd seen on Mr. Harding. "She called you," the woman continued, seeming amused. "We allowed her to call you. The offering requires a willing bloodline, a father's love strong enough to bring him into the deep woods, strong enough to make him stay." Offering? Michael's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" The woman smiled, and it was the most terrible thing Michael had ever seen. "This forest is old, older than your cities, your country, your way of thinking. There are powers here that your kind forgot, or chose to forget. We remember. We've always remembered. And we serve." One of the men spoke now, his voice like gravel. "Every cycle of the moon, the forest requires renewal. Blood and will freely given, or the balance shifts. The last full moon, we had no offering. The forest grew hungry. It took 3 of your hikers, but that's not the same as a proper ritual. The hunger grows." "You're insane," Sarah said, but her voice shook. "All of you are insane." "Are we?" The woman gestured to the forest around them. "Look closely, Mother. See what your rational mind has been trying not to see." Michael did look, and his breath caught in his throat. The trees weren't right. They never had been right, but he'd been too focused on forward motion to really see it. The trunks twisted in ways that defied natural growth patterns. The moss didn't just grow on them. It pulsed, expanding and contracting like lungs breathing. And between the trees, in the shadows that should have been empty, there were shapes. Watching. Waiting. "The moon will be full in 3 nights, the woman continued. "At midnight on that night, the ritual must be completed. Your daughter has already been marked." She pointed at Evelyn, and Michael saw with growing horror that his daughter's arms were covered in the same symbols he'd seen carved into the trees. Someone had painted them on her skin in what looked like ash or dirt. "The father must make the choice," one of the men said. "You can take her place. Your life, your will, your blood offered freely to sustain the balance. Or she remains, and you go back to your world of concrete and fluorescent lights, and you live with the knowledge of what you left behind." "That's not a choice," Michael said, his voice breaking. "You're threatening to murder my daughter unless I let you murder me instead." "No," the woman said softly. "We're offering you a choice that most never get. The forest will take what it needs. The only question is whether you love your child enough to spare her the fear." Evelyn was crying now, silent tears running down her face. Michael could see she was trying to be brave, trying to stay strong, but she was 16 years old and terrified beyond measure. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad, please. I'm so scared." Something broke inside Michael. He started forward, ready to physically fight through the circle of people to reach his daughter, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Wait," she hissed. "Michael, wait, think, there has to be another way." "There isn't," the woman said, as if she'd heard Sarah's whisper from across the clearing. "There's never another way. The forest is law here. We don't make the rules. We simply follow them, or we die." "How long?" Michael demanded. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since before I was born," the woman said. "My grandmother performed the rituals before me, her mother before her, generations, going back to when white settlers first tried to claim this forest. The native peoples who lived here before knew better. They made their own offerings, maintained their own balance. We're just inheritors of a debt that can never be fully paid." "And the Park Service knows?" Sarah asked, something in her voice changing. "The rangers know what you're doing." The woman's smile returned. "Some know more than others. Some participate. Some simply turn away. It's easy to dismiss what you see in the forest. Easy to call it wildlife attacks, exposure, simple accidents. People go missing in national parks all the time. Who questions it?" Michael thought of Ranger Morrison's face, her warning. "Don't stay after dark. Don't let them see you watching." She'd known. Of course she'd known. 3 days, Michael said, his mind racing. You said the ritual has to happen on the full moon. That's 3 days from now. 3 nights, the man corrected, beginning at midnight. It takes time to prepare an offering, to break the will, to make the vessel ready. So you have to keep us here, Michael continued, trying to find an angle, any angle. You can't just kill us now. You need us for the ritual. The woman's expression shifted slightly, and Michael felt a small surge of hope. He'd found something, a weakness in their plan. We need one of you, the woman said carefully. The daughter is already prepared. But a father's love, freely choosing to take her place, that's a stronger offering. More power for the forest. But if you refuse, if you try to leave, if you try to fight, she shrugged. Then we simply keep the girl. And you go home to your empty house, and your empty bed, and your empty life, knowing you could have saved her. You're lying, Sarah said suddenly, her voice sharp with the logic that had made her such a good attorney. If you could just take anyone, you wouldn't need this elaborate ritual. You wouldn't need willing participants. There's something you're not telling us. Some rule you have to follow. The 3 leaders of the group exchanged glances, and Michael saw something flicker across their faces. Concern? Uncertainty? Mom's right, Evelyn called out, her voice stronger now despite her fear. They've been chanting about balance and choice and willing hearts. They need us to choose. They need us to give ourselves willingly. The woman's eyes narrowed. Clever family, but understanding the rules doesn't mean you can break them. The choice is still the same. The father for the daughter, or the daughter for the forest. 3 days to decide. And if we try to leave? Michael asked. Then you'll find the forest doesn't easily let go of what it's marked. Your daughter is painted with the signs. She belongs here now, until the ritual releases her or claims her. You could carry her out on your back, but she would die before you reach the road. The forest would take her, and her death would be slow and terrible. Alone in the dark between the trees. Michael looked at Sarah, looked at Evelyn, looked at the circle of possessed people surrounding them, their black eyes reflecting nothing of their former humanity. He thought of the ranger's warning, the symbols on the trees, the arranged animal corpses, and he made a decision. We'll stay, he said. 3 days, but we're not agreeing to anything. We're staying to be with our daughter, to protect her, and to find a way out of this. The woman laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Protect her? In this forest? From us? Father, you have no idea what you're up against. But yes, stay. Stay and watch. Stay and see what comes as the moon grows full. Perhaps then you'll understand that fighting is futile. Perhaps then you'll make the right choice. She gestured, and the circle of people stepped back, creating a gap. Go back to the camp, set up your tent, eat your food. Pretend this is a normal night in the wilderness, but remember, we're always watching. The forest is always watching, and the clock is always ticking. Michael took Sarah's hand and pushed through the gap in the circle, pulling her toward Evelyn. His daughter ran to them, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling her sob against his chest. She smelled like fear sweat and wood smoke and his little girl, and he swore silently that he would find a way to save her or die trying. They walked back to the camp in silence, the possessed figures following at a distance like a funeral procession. The sun was setting now, the shadows between the trees growing long and hungry. Michael could feel eyes on them from every direction, not just human eyes. The forest itself was watching, waiting, judging. That night, they huddled together in one of the torn tents, trying to stay warm as the temperature dropped. Evelyn told them everything, how Mr. Harding had led them deeper into the forest than planned, how the symbols had started appearing, how one by one the students had been given drugged water and painted with the marks, how those 3 cultists had emerged from the ruins like they'd been waiting there for decades, how she'd felt the forest closing in around her, alive and malevolent and impossibly old. I tried to run, she whispered. After I called you, I tried to run back to the trailhead, but the trail kept changing. I'd walk for hours and end up right back here. The forest wouldn't let me leave. Michael held her tighter. We'll find a way. There's always a way. But he wasn't sure he believed it, because as darkness fell completely and the sounds of the forest changed, became wetter, more predatory, more aware, he began to understand what they were really facing. This wasn't some group of crazy people playing out a delusion. This was something older and more terrible than his rational mind could encompass. The forest was hungry, and in 3 days, at midnight, it would feed. Over the next 48 hours, Michael learned what true helplessness felt like. He tried everything he could think of to find a way out, but the cultists had been telling the truth. The forest itself seemed to be working against them. Every time Michael tried to scout the trail back toward the ranger station, he'd walk for hours only to end up right back at the camp. The trail would twist without him noticing, double back on itself, fork in impossible ways. Twice he tried marking trees with his knife so he could track his path. But when he came back, the marks were gone, the trees smooth as if they'd never been touched. Sarah tried using her phone's GPS, but it showed them in a dozen different locations simultaneously, the signal jumping wildly between impossible coordinates. Sometimes they were in the middle of the forest. Sometimes the phone claimed they were in the ocean. Once it placed them in a town that had been abandoned in the 1890s. Evelyn remained marked with the symbols, and she was getting sicker. Not physically ill exactly, but weaker, more lethargic. She slept most of the second day, murmuring in her sleep in a language Michael didn't recognize. When she was awake, her eyes sometimes went distant and unfocused, like she was seeing things that weren't there. Or perhaps things that were there, but shouldn't be visible. The other students, the ones who hadn't been fully possessed yet, were in similar states. Michael counted 11 of them plus his daughter, all marked and weakening. The 3 cultist leaders kept vigil at the ruins, never seeming to sleep or eat. The possessed ones, Mr. Harding, Ms. Peterson, and 5 students, stood in their line and swayed and whispered their constant litany about the moon and the offering and the balance. On the second night, as Michael lay awake listening to the forest breathe, he heard Sarah crying quietly. "I'm a lawyer," she whispered when she realized he was awake. "I solve problems. I find angles. I negotiate. But this, Michael, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fight something like this." "We keep trying," Michael said, but his voice was hollow. "We don't give up. The moon is tomorrow night." Michael knew. He'd been counting every hour. 24 hours left. 24 hours to find a solution, to break whatever hold the forest had on them, to get Evelyn out. But as the third day dawned, gray and misty and oppressive, Michael felt his options narrowing to a single terrible point. The female cultist leader approached him as he was trying to force Evelyn to eat some protein bars. His daughter was barely responsive now, her skin pale and covered in a cold sweat. The symbols on her arms had darkened, looking less like paint and more like burns. "You're running out of time," the woman said. Not gloating, just stating fact. "She's being prepared whether you choose or not. The forest is already taking her. By midnight tonight she'll be so deep in the ritual space that pulling her out would destroy her mind. Better that her body dies than that." "There has to be another way," Michael said desperately. "Some other offering you can make. Take me now, just let her go." "It doesn't work like that. The ritual has specific requirements, specific timing. We've spent months preparing this site, these offerings. The moon is nearly full and the forest is starving. If the ritual fails, if no one is offered at midnight, the forest will take indiscriminately. Everyone in this clearing will die, including your daughter, including you and your wife, including every student here. The forest doesn't care about your morality or your love. It only cares about balance." "That's not balance," Michael spat. "That's murder. Call it what you want. The forest calls it survival. 12 lives for thousands? A few deaths every month so the trees keep growing, the water keeps flowing, the ecosystem remains intact. There are worse things than what we do here." She crouched down to look him in the eye, and for the first time, Michael saw past the inhuman certainty to something that might have been regret. "I was 12 when my mother first brought me here," she said quietly. "I screamed and cried and begged, just like you're doing now. But she made the choice. She took the place of the marked girl that cycle. and I watched her die. The woman's voice went distant. I watched the forest take her, root and branch growing through her, until there was nothing left but nutrients returning to the soil. And I understood. This is how it works. This is how it's always worked. We're not evil. We're just custodians, mediators between the old powers and the new world that thinks it's conquered everything. Then let it be me, Michael said. Tonight, midnight, I'll take Evelyn's place. Just let her go. Let all the kids go. The woman studied him for a long moment. You would do it? Truly? Walk into the ritual knowing you'll die? Yes. The word came out without hesitation. Michael had known on some level since the moment he'd heard Evelyn's terrified voice on the phone 3 days ago. He would do anything to save his daughter. Anything. Then it will be done, the woman said, standing. Prepare yourself. The ritual begins at midnight. She walked away, leaving Michael alone with Evelyn's barely conscious form and the growing certainty that he had just agreed to his own death. Sarah found him an hour before midnight. She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry and hard and full of a terrible resolve. I know what you're going to do, she said. I have to. I know. She took his hands. Michael, I need you to know something. If this works, if they let Evelyn go, I'm going to burn this place to the ground. I'm going to expose these people. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happens here. They'll never believe you. Maybe not, but I have to try. She pulled him close, kissed him hard and desperate. I love you. Evelyn loves you. Don't forget that, whatever happens in there. I won't. They woke Evelyn as midnight approached. She was more alert now, as if sensing the approaching climax. When Michael told her what he was going to do, she grabbed his shirt with surprising strength. No, Dad, no, you can't. I won't let you. It's not your choice, sweetheart. Then it's not your choice either. She was crying now, angry and terrified. You can't just decide to die for me. That's not how this works. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. Michael smoothed her hair back from her face, memorizing every detail. But this is what fathers do. We protect our children, no matter what. The cultists came for him at 5 minutes to midnight, the 3 leaders flanked by their possessed followers. They'd built up a massive bonfire at the center of the ruins, flames reaching 20 feet into the air and casting wild shadows through the clearing. The symbols carved into the stones seemed to glow in the firelight, pulsing with a rhythm that matched Michael's racing heartbeat. They led him to the center of the ritual space. The 11 marked students, Evelyn among them, had been arranged in a circle around the fire. They were conscious but unresisting, their eyes glazed and distant. Stand in the fire, the female leader instructed. Michael's legs locked up. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to survive. But he thought of Evelyn, of the promise he'd made when she was born that he would always protect her, always keep her safe. He stepped into the flames. The fire didn't burn, not at first. It was cool, almost gentle, wrapping around him like water. But then the cultists began chanting, their voices rising in a language that hurt to hear, syllables that bent wrong in the air. The marked students joined in, their young voices creating harmonies that should have been impossible. And the fire changed. It grew hotter, but from the inside out. Michael felt his skin begin to blister, his throat close up from the smoke. But worse than the physical pain was the sensation of being pulled apart at some fundamental level. Like the forest was reaching inside him, into him, through every cell and molecule, claiming him in ways that went beyond flesh and bone. He screamed, but the sound was lost in the chanting. Through the flames he could see Evelyn, tears streaming down her face, held back by Sarah as she tried to reach him. He could see the cultists swaying in unison, their faces ecstatic. He could see the trees around the clearing leaning in, growing, their branches extending like hands eager to receive an offering. And he could see things moving between the trees, the shapes he'd glimpsed before but clear now in the firelight. They weren't animals. They weren't human. They were something older, something that wore the forest like a skin. The pain became everything. Michael felt himself breaking, fragmenting, his consciousness starting to dissolve like salt in water. This was death, he realized. Not the quick end he'd imagined, but a slow absorption, his self being taken apart piece by piece and fed into whatever lived in this forest's heart. But as his vision started to go dark, as he felt himself slipping away, Michael saw something that gave him one last surge of hope. Evelyn's marks were fading, the symbols on her arms were dissolving, the paint or ash or whatever they'd used flaking away like dead skin. She was being released. The ritual was working. His death was buying her freedom. That made it bearable. Almost. And then the gunshot rang out. The chanting stopped abruptly. The fire's heat lessened. Through the smoke and his failing vision, Michael saw Ranger Morrison standing at the edge of the clearing, a shotgun in her hands. "Step away from the fire," she commanded, her voice hard as iron. "All of you. Now." The female cultist leader turned to face her, expression more surprised than afraid. "You know you can't stop this, Rebecca. You know what happens if we don't complete the ritual." "I know what you claim happens," Morrison said, "but I've lived here 30 years and I'm done watching people die for your old stories. I'm done being complicit." She pumped the shotgun. "Step away." The cultists hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Morrison grabbed Michael and hauled him bodily out of the fire. His legs gave out and he collapsed in the mud, his skin blistered and smoking, but somehow still alive. "Get them out," Morrison shouted to Sarah. "All the kids, get them moving. There's a jeep trail half a mile north. Follow the yellow markers I put on the trees. I'll hold them here." "You'll die," the male cultist said, his voice almost sad. "The forest will take you for interfering. Then it takes me." Morrison's hands were steady on the gun. "But not these kids, not tonight." What happened next happened fast. Sarah and Morrison got the students moving, half carrying Michael and Evelyn. The cultists tried to stop them, but Morrison fired a warning shot that sent them scattering. The possessed students were slower to react, confused without the ritual to guide them. They crashed through the undergrowth, following marks Michael hadn't noticed before. Small yellow tags tied to low branches, barely visible in the darkness. Behind them, he could hear Morrison shouting, another gunshot, screams. And beneath it all, a sound like the forest itself groaning, angry at being denied its due. They found the jeep trail, found Morrison's old Ranger truck parked 100 yards down, keys in the ignition. Sarah got them all loaded, 12 students, Michael with his burned skin and shell-shocked mind. Evelyn barely conscious but alive. As Sarah gunned the engine and they tore down the narrow trail, Michael looked back one last time. Through the trees, he could see the orange glow of the bonfire, could see shapes moving in the darkness, converging on a single point where Morrison had made her stand. Then they rounded a corner and it was gone, swallowed by the forest. They didn't stop driving until they reached the ranger station. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink that looked impossibly normal. Sarah called 911 from the station phone, her voice calm and professional as she reported a dangerous cult operating in the park, possible casualties, requesting immediate police and medical assistance. The paramedics arrived within 40 minutes. The police an hour after that. Michael gave his statement in the hospital, his burns being treated while he told them about the cultists, the ritual, Ranger Morrison's rescue. He showed them the map Morrison had given them, explained where to find the camp. They sent a team out immediately. Sheriffs, FBI, park rangers from neighboring jurisdictions. They searched for 3 days. They never found the camp, never found the ruins, never found Morrison's body or the cultists or the possessed students. The official report stated that Michael and Sarah Carter, along with their daughter Evelyn and 11 other students from Jefferson High School, had gotten lost while on a camping trip in Olympic National Park. They'd experienced psychological distress from the experience, likely exacerbated by dehydration and exposure. Ranger Rebecca Morrison had located them and escorted them out before disappearing herself. Her fate remained unknown, likely another casualty of the dangerous wilderness. No cult, no ritual, no ancient forest entities demanding sacrifice. Just another strange disappearance in a park known for strange disappearances. Michael knew better than to push it. He'd seen what happened to people who pushed too hard against things the world didn't want to acknowledge. 6 months later, Michael stood in his backyard watching Evelyn play with their dog. She'd recovered physically, though she still had nightmares. They all did. Sarah had quit her law firm job and was now working for a nonprofit that helped victims of religious cults. She said it helped to do something. Michael had started researching, carefully, quietly, using VPNs and encrypted searches. And he'd found things, stories, accounts, patterns. Olympic wasn't the only park with strange disappearances, wasn't the only wilderness with rumors of ancient powers and terrible bargains. There were places in America, he'd learned, that had never been fully tamed. Places where the old rules still applied. Places where, when the moon was full and the balance demanded, people disappeared. And he'd found something else too, in an old newspaper archive from 1987. A photo of a park ranger, younger but unmistakable. Rebecca Morrison being commended for 20 years of service. 20 years in 1987. Which meant she'd been at Olympic for at least 50 years when she'd rescued them. 50 years of watching people die, of being complicit, until finally she'd had enough. Michael thought about her sometimes. Wondered if she'd survived that night. Wondered if the forest had taken her, or if she'd managed to escape like they had. But he didn't go looking. He'd learned his lesson about looking too closely at things that wanted to stay hidden, because sometimes late at night when the moon was full and the shadows between the trees grew deep and hungry, Michael would stand at his window and look out at the small patch of woods behind their suburban house. And he would see shapes moving in the darkness, watching, waiting, reminding him that escape was an illusion, that they'd been marked by the forest, even if the physical symbols had faded. The forest always remembered, and when it called again, because it would call again, Michael knew that with bone-deep certainty, the choice would return. The father for the daughter, the old balance, demanding payment. He just hoped when that time came, he'd be brave enough to make the right choice again. If this story gave you chills, follow for more quality terror. Could you survive in Michael's place? What would you sacrifice to save your child? Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? The symbols, the possessed students, or the realization that the forest never truly lets go? Isabella Chen had built her entire career on the foundation of observable facts. 17 years with the National Park Service's Search and Rescue Division had taught her that missing persons cases, no matter how mysterious they initially appeared, always resolved into explicable patterns. Human error, environmental hazards, medical emergencies, or in the worst cases, foul play, but always something rational, something that could be mapped, measured, and understood. She approached each case with the same methodical precision that had earned her commendations from 3 different park superintendents and the quiet respect of rangers half again her age. The call about Andrew Holloway came through on a Tuesday morning in late September, when the aspens in Cascade Peaks National Park were turning gold, and the first frost had painted silver edges on the pine needles. Andrew, a 29-year-old graduate student conducting wildlife surveys, had missed 2 scheduled check-ins. His research supervisor at the university had tried his satellite phone repeatedly without success. Standard protocol for missing researchers, nothing that immediately raised Isabella's pulse. She'd coordinated 43 successful recoveries in her career. Most people turned up within 72 hours, embarrassed about a dead radio battery or an ankle twisted far from any trail. Isabella assembled her initial assessment file in her office at park headquarters, a cramped space that smelled of coffee and pine sap, its walls covered with topographical maps marked with colored pins denoting previous search operations. Andrew's research permit indicated he'd been conducting camera trap surveys in the Whisper Creek drainage, a remote watershed on the park's northeastern boundary. The area wasn't technically dangerous, no significant avalanche terrain, well below the elevation where altitude sickness became a factor, and the creek itself ran shallow this time of year. But it was isolated. The nearest maintained trail ended 4 miles from his last known position, and cell service was non-existent beneath the dense canopy of old-growth forest. She studied Andrew's intake photographs from his research permit application. A lean young man with dark hair pulled into a small bun, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a bookish appearance at odds with the outdoor gear in the background of the photo. His emergency contact was listed as his sister, Jennifer Holloway, who lived in Denver. Isabella made a note to call her once the initial search teams deployed. Better to wait until she had concrete information to share, rather than alarm family members prematurely. By noon, Isabella was in a Park Service helicopter, flying over the Whisper Creek drainage with pilot Marcus Webb, who'd been flying these mountains for 20 years. The forest canopy spread beneath them like a vast green-gold carpet, broken only by the silver thread of the creek and occasional granite outcrops that thrust through the trees like broken teeth. Marcus brought them low over Andrew's designated research area, the helicopter's shadow racing across the treetops. "There," Marcus said, pointing. Through the plexiglass bubble of the cockpit, Isabella spotted a small blue tent pitched in a clearing beside the creek. She felt the familiar tension in her chest ease slightly. Tent still standing. No obvious signs of a bear encounter or environmental damage. That was good. That suggested Andrew might have simply wandered off his research route and gotten turned around. Marcus couldn't land in the confined space of the clearing, so he set down in a larger meadow half a mile downstream. Isabella grabbed her pack, 72-hour supplies, medical kit, GPS unit, radio, and satellite phone, and started hiking upstream. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and the forest was quiet except for the distant percussion of a woodpecker and the constant murmur of Whisper Creek over its rocky bed. She'd walked this terrain dozens of times, training new rangers, conducting wilderness assessments, coordinating previous searches. The forest had a rhythm she understood, a language of light and shadow, sound and silence, that spoke to her practiced instincts. Nothing about the afternoon felt wrong as she navigated the game trails and deadfall, her boots finding purchase on the moss-covered stones. Andrew's camp appeared exactly as it had from the air. The blue tent was properly staked, its rainfly secured against the autumn weather. Isabella approached with the trained caution of someone who'd found both living victims and bodies in similar circumstances. She called out first, her voice carrying through the trees. No response. She called again, louder. Only the creek answered, its voice constant and indifferent. The tent's zipper was closed, but not locked. Isabella opened it carefully, her mind automatically cataloging details. Sleeping bag neatly rolled, backpack still present and apparently fully stocked, research notebook on top of the sleeping bag with a pen marking a page. She pulled on latex gloves and opened the notebook. Andrew's handwriting was precise, almost obsessively neat. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. Camera stations 12 to 17 checked and maintained. Station 15 retrieved unusual footage, large canid, possibly wolf, though coloration doesn't match known populations. We'll investigate location tomorrow. Growing concerned about temporal anomalies in photo timestamps. 3 cameras showing significant discrepancies with actual time. Equipment malfunction. Need to recalibrate. Isabella frowned. Temporal anomalies. Equipment malfunction was far more likely than any actual time discrepancy, but it was odd that multiple cameras would fail in the same way. She photographed the page with her phone, then continued her examination of the camp. Andrew's food supply was intact, neatly organized in a bear-proof container. His spare batteries, first aid kit, water filtration system, everything a competent wilderness researcher would need was present and accounted for. The only thing missing was Andrew himself and his primary GPS unit. Isabella stood and surveyed the clearing with the systematic attention she'd cultivated over nearly 2 decades. The campsite sat in a level area approximately 30 meters from the creek, surrounded by a mixed forest of lodgepole pine and Engelmann spruce, with a scattering of aspen along the water's edge. The ground was carpeted with pine needles and fallen leaves, Not ideal for tracking, but not impossible. She began a careful spiral pattern outward from the tent, looking for any sign of Andrew's departure. She found his tracks within 10 minutes, boot prints in a patch of soft earth near the creek heading upstream and slightly away from the water. The tracks were clear enough that Isabella could make out the distinctive tread pattern of Salomon hiking boots. She followed them carefully, marking her GPS as she went, documenting her route. Standard procedure. Everything by the book. The tracks led her deeper into the forest, away from the established game trails. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, she found something that made her pause. A camera trap, one of Andrew's research stations, mounted to a Douglas fir at chest height. The camera's indicator light blinked green, showing it was active and recording. Isabella approached it carefully, noting its position with her GPS before examining the device. It was a Bushnell Trophy cam, a reliable model she'd seen researchers use countless times. The digital display on the back showed it was functioning normally, memory card at 73% capacity. She considered leaving it in place for Andrew to retrieve, but something made her pull the memory card and swap it for a spare from her emergency kit. Evidence, she thought. Whatever Andrew had filmed here might explain his concerns about temporal anomalies. She continued following his tracks. The forest was changing subtly as she moved deeper into the drainage. The trees grew larger, older, their trunks thick with age and their branches creating a canopy so dense that the afternoon light barely penetrated. Isabella checked her GPS periodically, noting her position. She'd traveled almost 2 miles from Andrew's camp, climbing gradually into terrain that grew increasingly rough. Then his tracks simply stopped. Isabella stood in a small clearing, staring at the ground where Andrew's boot prints ended mid-stride, not faded away, not obscured by terrain, just stopped as if he'd been lifted bodily into the air. She knelt down, examining the last clear print. The impression was deep and complete, showing the full weight distribution of someone walking normally. There should have been another print 18 to 24 inches ahead, given the length of his stride. There was nothing. She felt the first cold finger of unease trace down her spine. In 17 years, she'd never seen tracks simply end like this. She widened her search pattern, checking in expanding circles for any continuation of the trail. Nothing. She checked the surrounding trees for signs of climbing. Nothing. She examined the ground for scuff marks that might indicate a struggle or a fall. Nothing. Isabella stood and activated her radio. "Base, this is Chen. I'm at Andrew Holloway's last known position. Situation is anomalous. Tracks end without continuation, requesting additional search personnel." Static answered her. She tried again, adjusting the frequency. More static, though she was well within radio range of the relay tower on Sentinel Peak. She switched to her satellite phone. The device powered on, ran through its connection sequence, and displayed searching for signal before timing out. That shouldn't happen. Satellite phones worked anywhere with a clear view of the sky, and Isabella could see patches of sky through the canopy above her. She checked her GPS unit. The screen showed her position, but something was wrong with the display. Her track log, which should have shown a clean line from Andrew's camp to this location, instead showed a tangled mess of overlapping lines, as if she'd walked the same ground repeatedly from different directions. That was impossible. She'd followed a straight course, marking her path carefully. Isabella felt her pulse quicken, felt the first stirrings of something that her rational mind refused to name. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think methodically. Equipment failure. Multiple systems failing simultaneously was unlikely but not impossible. Solar flares could disrupt electronics. She'd heard of cases where magnetic anomalies in certain rock formations caused compass problems. She checked her analog compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on any direction. The forest around her had grown silent. Isabella realized this suddenly, the absence of sound pressing against her ears like physical pressure. No birds, no wind in the branches, no distant rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Even Whisper Creek, which should have been audible from this location, had fallen silent. The quality of the light had changed too, though she couldn't immediately identify how. It seemed flatter somehow, less dimensional, as if the shadows had lost their depth. Isabella turned slowly, examining the clearing. It looked the same as it had moments before. The same trees, the same arrangement of rocks in deadfall, the same carpet of pine needles underfoot. But something felt fundamentally wrong. The proportions seemed slightly off, as if she were looking at a photograph that had been stretched or compressed in ways too subtle to consciously identify, but disturbing nonetheless. She made a decision. Back to Andrew's camp, regroup, get out of this drainage and return with a full search team and properly functioning equipment. She turned to retrace her steps, following her own boot prints in the soft earth. After 5 minutes of walking, she arrived at the clearing where Andrew's tracks had ended. The same clearing, she was certain. The distinctive pattern of 3 white stones forming a rough triangle, the lightning-scarred pine at the clearing's edge. These were the exact landmarks she'd noted before. Impossible. She'd walked in a straight line, away from this location. Her tracks in the soft earth confirmed it. She could see the trail she'd made leading off into the forest. But when she'd followed that trail, it had somehow looped back to this starting point. Isabella felt sweat prickling her forehead despite the cool autumn air. She pulled out her GPS unit again. The screen still showed that impossible tangle of overlapping tracks, but now something else caught her attention. The timestamp. According to the GPS, it was 6:47 p.m. That couldn't be right. She'd left Andrew's camp around 2:30 p.m. Even accounting for her careful tracking and the time spent examining the camera trap, no more than 2 hours should have passed. The sun's position confirmed it. Still afternoon light filtering through the canopy, not the fading illumination of early evening. She checked her watch. The mechanical Timex she'd worn for a decade, reliable and water-resistant. It showed 3:15 p.m. Isabella stood motionless, her rational mind struggling to reconcile the contradictory information. Equipment failure across multiple independent systems. Disorientation causing her to travel in circles. Stress-induced time distortion. These were the explanations her training suggested, the rational frameworks that had always served her well. But standing in that silent clearing, with the forest pressing close around her, and the light taking on that flat, dimensionless quality, Isabella felt the first hairline crack appear in her certainty about the nature of reality. She tried the radio again. Static. But this time she thought she heard something underneath the white noise. A voice, perhaps, or something that might have been a voice if voices could sound hollow and wrong and come from someplace impossibly distant. She released the transmit button quickly, her hand trembling slightly. The forest was still silent. Completely, utterly silent. The absence of sound had become its own presence, a weight that pressed against her eardrums. Isabella realized she could hear her own heartbeat, loud and fast in the terrible quiet. Then, from somewhere ahead, or behind or above, the direction impossible to determine, she heard footsteps. Human footsteps, boots on forest floor, approaching with steady, measured rhythm. Relief flooded through her. Andrew, finally. Or another ranger responding to her radio call before the equipment failed. "Hello?" she called out. "Andrew? This is Isabella Chen with Park Service Search and Rescue." The footsteps continued, steady and unhurried. They seemed to be circling the clearing, staying just out of sight among the trees. Isabella turned, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound moved, maintaining its distance. Circle after circle, neither approaching nor receding. "Identify yourself," Isabella said, her voice sharper now. She wasn't afraid, she told herself, just confused by the equipment failures and the acoustic properties of the forest. Sound could do strange things in dense woods, echoing and reflecting in ways that confused direction and distance. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, Isabella heard her own breathing, harsh and quick. Then, from directly behind her, so close she felt breath on the back of her neck. "Help me." Isabella spun around. No one was there. The clearing was empty, showing only trees and shadows, and the flat, wrong light filtering through the canopy. "Help me find my way back." The voice came from a different direction now, ahead and to her left. It sounded like Andrew's voice, or what Andrew's voice might sound like based on the brief voicemail message she'd heard in his research permit file. But there was something hollow about it, something that echoed in ways that voices shouldn't echo in open forest. "Andrew? Where are you? Show yourself." Isabella was moving now, circling the clearing, her hand instinctively dropping to the bear spray on her hip. Not that bear spray would help against whatever was happening, but the familiar weight of the canister was reassuring. "I can't find my way back," the voice said, coming from yet another direction. "The forest keeps changing. The trails lead nowhere. Time doesn't work right. Help me, please. Help me find my way back." Isabella's training warred with her rising panic. People could throw their voices, especially in terrain like this. Andrew could be injured, disoriented, his sense of direction scrambled by hypothermia or head trauma. That would explain everything. The strange behavior, the voice coming from multiple directions, her own disorientation. Medical emergency. That was the framework. That made sense. "Andrew, I need you to stay still and keep talking. I'm a search and rescue coordinator. I'm going to come to you, but I need you to help me find your location. Can you do that?" Silence, then quietly from so many directions at once that Isabella's vision swam trying to process it. There is no way back. There's only deeper in. The forest has been waiting, it's patient. It's been patient for so long. The sun was setting. Isabella realized this with a jolt of shock that momentarily overrode her fear. The light was definitely fading now, the shadows growing longer and darker. But that was impossible. According to her watch, barely 45 minutes had passed since she'd first reached this clearing. Not enough time for sunset. The sun had been high when she'd started following Andrew's tracks. She looked up through the canopy. The sky had taken on the deep orange-purple of late evening, heavy clouds gathering like bruises. As she watched, the light continued to fade with unnatural speed. Minutes of twilight compressed into seconds. The forest was growing dark around her, the trees transforming into black silhouettes against a dying sky. Isabella fumbled for her headlamp, hands shaking as she pulled it from her pack and fitted it over her forehead. The LED beam cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating a small circle of forest floor and tree trunks. Everything beyond that circle was rapidly becoming absolute darkness. She clicked through the headlamp's settings to its highest output, but the beam seemed weaker than it should be, as if the darkness itself was drinking the light. "Help me." The voice was closer now, intimate as a whisper despite coming from the trees around her. "Help me before it's too late, before the forest takes everything, before you can't remember what's real anymore." Isabella was breathing hard, her pulse hammering in her throat. She forced herself to think rationally, to apply the frameworks that had always worked before. Hypothermia caused hallucinations. Carbon monoxide poisoning could create confusion and auditory distortions. She could be injured, concussed from a fall she didn't remember. These were rational explanations. She clung to them like lifelines. But even as she constructed these frameworks, she was aware of them crumbling. This was beyond equipment failure, beyond environmental factors or medical conditions. The forest around her was fundamentally wrong in ways that her rational mind had no tools to process. The darkness was complete now. Isabella's headlamp beam seemed to penetrate only a few feet into the void that surrounded her. She could no longer see the trees clearly, could no longer distinguish the landmarks she'd noted in the clearing. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, but she had the vertiginous sensation that she was standing on the edge of an impossible depth, that if she took a single step in the wrong direction, she would fall forever into a darkness that had no bottom. Isabella. Her name. Something was using her name. The voice was still hollow, still wrong, but it knew her. Isabella Chen, 17 years, 43 successful recoveries. You keep count, you measure everything, you think that makes you safe, you think that makes you understand. How did it know? Andrew wouldn't know these things about her. No one would know these specific details unless they'd studied her personnel file. Isabella felt a new dimension of fear open beneath her. The fear of being known, of having her most private thoughts and accomplishments exposed to something that wore Andrew's voice like an ill-fitting mask. "The forest doesn't care about your measurements," the voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the darkness itself. "The forest doesn't fit in your frameworks. You're going to learn this. You're going to understand that reality is so much larger and stranger than you ever imagined. And it will break you." Isabella ran. She had no destination, no plan, just the primal need to move, to escape. Her headlamp beam bounced wildly as her boots pounded across the forest floor. She crashed through undergrowth, scraped past tree trunks, splashed through what might have been Whisper Creek. The darkness pressed against her from all sides, a physical presence that seemed to thicken the air, making each breath a struggle. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs trembled, until she had to stop, gasping, bent double with her hands on her knees. The headlamp illuminated a small patch of ground at her feet. She was back in the clearing, the same clearing, the 3 white stones in their triangle, the lightning-scarred pine. Impossible. She'd run for what felt like 15 minutes, covering significant distance through the forest. But here she was, returned to this exact location as if she'd never left. Isabella straightened slowly, her body thrumming with exhaustion and fear. She turned in a slow circle, the headlamp beam sweeping across the clearing. With each rotation, she noticed something new, something wrong. The trees were in different positions, not obviously different, but subtly rearranged, as if someone had carefully moved them a few feet in random directions. The 3 white stones were closer together than before. The lightning-scarred pine had its scar on the opposite side of the trunk. She completed her rotation and gasped. Standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of her headlamp beam, was a figure. Human-shaped, but wrong in proportions she couldn't quite identify. It stood motionless, a deeper darkness against the dark forest. "Andrew?" Isabella's voice cracked. She wasn't sure what she hoped for, that it was Andrew, injured and confused, or that it was something else entirely, something that would explain the impossibilities surrounding her. The figure didn't respond. It simply stood, patient and still. Isabella took a step toward it, her headlamp beam stretching toward the shape. As the light touched it, the figure moved. Not walking, not running, but shifting position instantaneously. One moment at the clearing's edge, the next moment 10 feet to the left. Not moving between positions, simply ceasing to exist in one location and simultaneously existing in another. Isabella's mind struggled to process what she'd seen. Teleportation wasn't possible. People didn't move that way. But the evidence of her eyes was undeniable. The figure moved again, jumping positions with each blink of Isabella's eyes, circling her in discrete, instantaneous relocations. It was getting closer with each jump, 30 feet away, 20 feet, 15. She could see it more clearly now in the headlamp's illumination. It did look like Andrew, or like something that had studied photographs of Andrew and attempted to recreate him from memory. The proportions were almost right, the features almost correct, but with small wrongnesses that accumulated into profound wrongness. The arms hung too long, the head tilted at an angle that suggested the neck might be broken. The eyes reflected her headlamp beam with a flat animal shine. "I couldn't find my way back," it said with Andrew's hollow voice. "I walked and walked, but the forest kept changing. Time stopped meaning anything. I stopped meaning anything. Do you understand yet, Isabella? Do you see what this place does?" The thing that wore Andrew's shape moved closer with each word, appearing in a new position with each blink of Isabella's eyes. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. She wanted to run, but where would she go? The forest would just fold her path back to this clearing again. The darkness had become a loop, a trap that had closed around her. "You can measure things," the Andrew thing said. "You can count and catalog and make your careful notes. But you can't measure this. You can't quantify the way reality comes apart at the seams. You can't create a framework for understanding that nothing has meaning, that all your careful structures are just children's games played in a universe that doesn't care." 4 feet away now. Isabella could smell it. Not the expected odors of human sweat and unwashed clothing, but something else. Something like ozone and deep earth and the peculiar emptiness of space between stars. The smell of nothing. The forest is patient, it continued. It's been patient with me. It's showing me things. Layers beneath layers. Time folding back on itself. Trails that lead to the same destination no matter which direction you walk. I've seen myself from the outside, Isabella. I've watched myself standing in this clearing from 7 different angles simultaneously. I've been here for 4 days and 4 years and 4 seconds. Do you understand? Can your rational mind hold that paradox? Isabella's headlamp flickered. The LED dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. The battery should have had another 8 hours of life, but the light was dying as if it had been burning for days. The Andrew thing's face was fully visible now in the failing light, and Isabella saw with sick certainty that it was Andrew. That whatever this thing was, it had once been the young graduate student whose research permit photo sat in her file back at headquarters. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The thing tilted its head, considering her with those flat, reflective eyes. "Save me. Isabella, I'm not the one who needs saving. You are. You're the one who's still clinging to the idea that this place has rules, that it makes sense. You're the one who's going to have to choose." Choose what? Whether to stay rational as the world becomes increasingly irrational around you, holding on to your frameworks until they crack and you crack with them, or whether to let go, to accept that you never understood anything. That reality is stranger than you could possibly imagine, that you're so very, very small. Isabella's headlamp died completely. The darkness was absolute, a darkness so complete that Isabella couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. She could still hear the Andrew thing breathing nearby, a wet, rattling sound that didn't quite match human respiration. "I'll show you," it said. "I'll show you what the forest showed me. It's the only kindness I have left to give." Isabella felt hands grasp her shoulders. Too many hands, too many points of contact, as if the Andrew thing had grown additional limbs, or as if there were multiple versions of it touching her simultaneously. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged from her throat. The darkness was inside her mouth, filling her lungs, drowning her from within. Then the darkness exploded into light, not the gentle illumination of her headlamp or the warm gold of afternoon sun, but a cold white light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, a light that cast no shadows because it existed in all directions simultaneously. Isabella saw. She saw the clearing from above and below and from 7 angles that should have been impossible. She saw herself standing with her mouth open in a silent scream, while versions of the Andrew thing touched her with too many hands. She saw the forest extending in all directions, but the directions were wrong. Not north, south, east, and west, but in angles that folded back on themselves, paths that led both forward and backward through time. She saw Andrew, the real Andrew, or what had been the real Andrew. She saw him 4 days ago, setting up his camera trap and noting the temporal anomalies. She saw him following the strange tracks deeper into the forest. She saw the moment when reality had first fractured around him, when he'd noticed that the sun was in 2 positions in the sky simultaneously, when he'd realized his footprints led both away from and toward his camp at the same time. She saw him struggling to maintain his sanity as the forest revealed itself to be something other than forest, as the trees became diagrams of impossible geometry, as time folded and refolded until past and future existed in the same space. She saw him changing, his humanity peeling away in layers, until what remained was something that wore his shape but thought in dimensions that human minds weren't built to process. And she saw the forest itself, if forest was even the right word for what existed here. She saw it as a place where reality was thinner, where the normal rules that governed space and time and causality didn't quite hold. She saw it as something alive and aware and patient, something that had been here long before humans had invented measurement and classification, something that would continue long after the last ranger had filed the last report. Isabella saw infinity, and infinity saw her back, and found her wanting. Found her small and temporary and laughably insignificant. Found her careful measurements and frameworks to be less than child's games, less than the buzzing of an insect before the face of God. The white light collapsed back into darkness. Isabella found herself on her knees in the clearing, retching, though nothing came up. Her headlamp was working again, casting its familiar LED glow across pine needles and stone. The Andrew thing was gone. She was alone. But alone was no longer a simple concept. Isabella could feel the forest pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness, could sense the impossible geometries lurking just beyond the edge of perception. She knew with terrible certainty that she would never look at reality the same way again. Every measurement would be a lie. Every framework would be a desperate attempt to impose order on fundamental chaos. Every moment of confidence in her understanding of the world would be self-deception. She stood on trembling legs. Her GPS unit was still tangled and useless, but she no longer trusted it anyway. What did it matter what direction she walked when all directions led to the same place? What did it matter what time it was when time itself had become negotiable? Isabella started walking. Not back to Andrew's camp. She understood now that back had no meaning here. Just walking, one foot in front of the other, the headlamp illuminating 3 feet of forest ahead of her. Everything beyond that circle of light was mystery and terror and things her mind couldn't hold without breaking. She walked for hours or minutes or years. The forest changed around her constantly, trees rearranging themselves when she wasn't looking, trails appearing and disappearing, distances stretching and compressing according to rules that laughed at physics. Sometimes she saw other figures in the darkness beyond her headlamp, shapes that might have been Andrew or might have been previous victims, or might have been reflections of herself from timelines where she'd made different choices. Her radio crackled to life. "Chen, this is base. Do you copy?" Marcus's voice, clear and normal and impossibly distant, coming from a world where things made sense. Isabella grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Base, this is Chen. She stopped. What could she possibly say? How could she explain what she'd experienced to people who lived in a universe where reality behaved itself? "Chen, we've had a broken signal from you for 6 hours. We've got teams mobilizing. What's your situation?" 6 hours. Isabella checked her watch. It showed 3:47 p.m. 32 minutes had passed since she'd first arrived at Andrew's camp. Her GPS showed 6 hours. The forest showed eternity. Which measurement was true? All of them. None of them. "I found evidence of Andrew," she said carefully. "The situation is complicated. I need immediate extraction. All available resources." "Roger that. We've got your GPS coordinates. Helicopter is inbound. ETA 20 minutes. Isabella looked up. Through the canopy she could see a patch of sky. It was afternoon sky, early evening sky, and midnight sky all at once, the light wrong in ways that made her eyes hurt. She could hear the helicopter approaching, its rotors cutting through air that was simultaneously thin and thick near and far. The sound grew louder, then suddenly stopped. In the abrupt silence, Isabella heard laughter. Andrew's laughter, or something that could mimic Andrew's laughter, coming from the trees around her. The forest had let her make the radio call, had allowed her that moment of hope, because hope made the despair that followed so much more exquisite. "You can't leave," Andrew's hollow voice said from the darkness. "You've seen too much. You understand too much. The forest doesn't let people who understand leave. We stay here, Isabella. We become part of this place. We become the warnings that future searchers find and don't understand until it's too late." Isabella's headlamp flickered again. In the strobing light, she saw dozens of figures standing among the trees. Some wore modern hiking gear. Some wore clothes from decades past. Some wore things that might have been uniforms from agencies that no longer existed. All of them stood with that same too long reach of limbs, that same broken neck tilt of the head, those same flat, reflective eyes. 43 successful recoveries, one of them said in a woman's voice. "This will not be number 44. Isabella ran again, crashing blindly through the undergrowth. Her radio crackled with Marcus's voice, reporting coordinates, describing weather conditions, going through the routine checklist of an approaching extraction. The words were a lifeline to sanity. even as Isabella's eyes reported impossibilities. Trees that moved, distances that made no sense, shadows that fell in directions that violated the position of the sun. She burst into a clearing and stopped. It was the same clearing, always the same clearing, but this time there was something new. A tent, blue fabric, neatly staked, rain fly properly secured. Andrew's tent, or something's memory of Andrew's tent, or a trap designed to look like salvation. Isabella approached it carefully. The tent was empty, but inside was Andrew's research notebook. She opened it with shaking hands. The pages were covered with handwriting that started neat and precise and gradually deteriorated into frantic scrawls and then into patterns that might have been writing or might have been attempts to diagram impossible geometries. The final entry sprawled across 2 pages in letters that seemed to vibrate if she looked at them too long. There is no going back. There is only deeper in. The forest thinks in dimensions we can't process. Time is a loop. Space is a Mobius strip. I am everywhere and nowhere. I am then and now and never. I see myself finding this notebook. I see the next person finding this notebook. I see all the people who will find this notebook stretching forward and backward through time. We are all here. We are all always here. The forest is patient. Isabella's radio crackled. Chen, I have visual on your location. Descending for pickup. Keep your head down and move to the clearing center. She looked up. The helicopter was there, impossibly, hovering above the canopy. She could see Marcus in the cockpit, could see the concern on his face as he maneuvered the aircraft. This was real. This was escape. This was salvation. Isabella ran toward the clearing center, toward the downdraft of the rotor wash, toward the rescue that represented everything rational and safe and comprehensible about the world. She was 10 feet from the aircraft's skids when the forest reasserted itself. The helicopter was no longer descending. It was hovering at the same altitude, its rotor wash still pounding against Isabella's back. But the distance between her and salvation was no longer decreasing. She ran harder. The helicopter remained exactly 10 feet away, neither closer nor farther. Distance itself become a broken concept. Chen, you're not moving. Marcus's voice said over the radio, puzzled. You look like you're running, but your position isn't changing. GPS shows you're stationary. Isabella screamed, a sound of pure frustration and terror and dawning realization. The forest had let her hope, had dangled escape in front of her, and now it was teaching her the most horrible lesson. That there was no escape, that she would be allowed to see salvation but never reach it, that she would spend whatever remained of her existence running toward help that stayed forever just beyond her grasp. The helicopter began to ascend. Chen, something's wrong with our instruments, Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. We're getting false readings. We're going to have to abort and return with better equipment. No! Isabella shouted into the radio. Don't leave! Please don't leave! But the aircraft was rising, growing smaller, the rotor noise fading. Within seconds it had disappeared above the canopy, leaving Isabella alone in the clearing with only her headlamp and the darkness and the things that waited in the shadows. She sank to her knees. Her rational mind, the tool she'd trusted for 17 years, the framework she'd built her career upon, was completely useless here. Worse than useless, it was actively harmful, because it kept trying to find patterns and explanations where none existed, kept trying to impose order on fundamental chaos. Now you understand, Andrew's hollow voice said. Now you see. The forest has been patient with you. It's shown you what it showed me. That reality is negotiable, that your measurements mean nothing, that you are so very, very small. Isabella looked up. The Andrew thing stood before her, but now she could see it clearly for what it was. Not Andrew anymore. Not even something that had once been Andrew, but something that wore Andrew's shape the way she might wear a jacket. Behind it, arranged in a loose circle around the clearing, stood the others. Decades of missing hikers, searchers, researchers, all of them transformed into things that existed in dimensions human perception wasn't built to process. You have a choice, the Andrew thing said. You can cling to your rationality as it drives you mad. You can spend whatever remains of your existence trying to measure the immeasurable, trying to understand the incomprehensible. Or you can let go. You can accept. You can become part of this place. You can exist in the spaces between spaces and the times between times. It's not pleasant, but it's honest. The forest doesn't lie. It just shows you the truth of how little you ever understood. Isabella stood slowly. Her body was her own, still under her control. Her mind, what remained of it, was still hers. She had seen the impossible. She had been shown the fundamental wrongness underlying reality, but she was still herself. Still Isabella Chen. Still capable of choice. "I choose neither," she said quietly. "I choose to find Andrew. The real Andrew. The human being who came here to study wildlife, who noticed something wrong with his equipment, who deserves better than to become whatever you are." The thing wearing Andrew's face tilted its head with that signature broken neck angle. "Andrew is gone. I am what remains. I am what the forest made from the raw material of his existence. You're refusing to accept what you've already seen." "Maybe," Isabella said. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm delusional, trying to impose meaning where none exists. But that's still my choice to make. That's the one thing the forest can't take from me. The ability to decide how I respond to horror." She began walking. Not away from the Andrew thing, not toward any perceived exit, but methodically searching the clearing. Looking for something, anything, that might be a clue to the real Andrew's fate. Physical evidence. Something she could measure and catalog and use to build a framework, even if that framework was built on quicksand. The other figures watched her with their flat, reflective eyes. The forest pressed close, reality bending and warping around her. But Isabella kept searching, kept looking, kept trying to apply her skills to a situation that defied those skills. She found it near the lightning-scarred pine, a small pile of stones, carefully arranged in a pattern that seemed random but wasn't. 7 stones of specific sizes, placed at specific distances from each other. Isabella recognized the pattern from wilderness survival training. It was a trail marker, used when you had no other way to mark your route. Andrew had built this before the forest had taken him fully, before his humanity had peeled away in layers. Isabella photographed the stone pile, documented its position, then carefully reconstructed what it meant. The stones formed an arrow, pointing toward a specific direction. Not north or south or any cardinal direction, but toward something else. A thin place, perhaps. A weak point in the forest's impossible geometry. A way out that existed in dimensions she couldn't fully perceive but might be able to navigate if she stopped trying to measure and simply followed. "He's trying to help you," Isabella said to the Andrew thing. "Some part of him is still fighting, still trying to save people, still trying to be who he was." The thing didn't respond, but something shifted in its posture. Something that might have been recognition or pain or the last echo of human emotion, trying to express itself through a form that no longer worked the same way. Isabella followed the arrow. She walked in the direction the stones indicated, her headlamp cutting a small circle of light through the darkness. The forest changed around her with every step, trees rearranging, distances distorting, time folding back on itself. But she didn't try to measure or understand. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, following the path that Andrew, or the last fragment of what had been Andrew, had left for her. She walked through scenes of impossible beauty and terrible wrongness. Clearings where the trees grew in fractal patterns that hurt to look at. Streams that flowed uphill and downhill simultaneously. Skies that showed noon and midnight, and every hour in between all at once. Her rational mind screamed at the contradictions, but Isabella pushed those screams aside. Understanding wasn't necessary. Only movement. Only following the trail that had been left for her. After walking for an unmeasurable time, Isabella emerged into afternoon sunlight. Real sunlight coming from a sun that was in one position in the sky, casting shadows that fell in directions that made sense. She was standing on a maintained trail, marked with proper National Park Service trail markers. Behind her, the forest looked like forest. Ordinary trees arranged in ordinary ways with ordinary forest sounds of birds and wind and distant water. Isabella turned and looked back. For just a moment she saw them, Andrew and all the others, standing among the trees, watching her with eyes that reflected something other than light. Then they faded, or she lost the ability to perceive them, or they had never been there at all. The forest was just forest, ordinary and comprehensible and perfectly rational. Her radio crackled. "Chen, this is base. We have your signal again. You've been out of contact for 14 hours. What's your status?" 14 hours. Isabella checked her watch. It showed 3:51 p.m. 4 minutes had passed since she'd last checked it. She looked at her GPS. It showed a track log that made sense. A simple path from Andrew's camp to this trail. Her equipment was working normally again. The forest had released her. But it hadn't released Andrew. And it hadn't released whatever understanding Isabella had gained in that place where reality bent and broke and showed its true face. "This is Chen," Isabella said into the radio. "I'm mobile and uninjured. I found evidence that Andrew Holloway has been deceased for several days. I was unable to recover remains. The situation is complicated. I need immediate extraction, and I need to file a detailed report. This area needs to be closed to public access." She heard the question start over the radio. What had happened? Where were the remains? What did she mean by complicated? But Isabella was already walking, following the maintained trail toward the point where a helicopter could extract her, where she could return to a world that followed rules and made sense and allowed her to pretend that the last 14 hours, or 4 minutes, or eternity, hadn't happened. But she knew the truth now, knew that beneath the orderly surface of reality lurked something vast and strange and patient, knew that there were places where the normal rules didn't apply, where human measurement and understanding were less than jokes, knew that Andrew was still in that place, transformed into something that existed in dimensions she couldn't process, leaving trail markers for future victims or future survivors, trying to be helpful even after humanity had been stripped away. 3 weeks later, Isabella sat in a conference room at park headquarters, facing a review board that included her supervisor, a representative from the National Park Service's regional office, and 2 investigators from the Department of the Interior. They'd read her report. They'd examined her equipment logs. They'd reviewed the camera card she'd retrieved from Andrew's research station, which showed nothing but static and timestamps that made no sense. "Coordinator Chen," the regional representative said carefully, "your report describes temporal anomalies, spatial distortions, and what you characterize as reality breaking down. You're an experienced professional with an exemplary record. Help us understand what actually happened in the Whisper Creek drainage." Isabella had spent those 3 weeks thinking about how to answer that question. She'd considered lying, fabricating a rational narrative that would satisfy bureaucratic requirements. She'd considered telling the complete truth, knowing it would end her career, but feeling obligated to warn others. She'd considered saying nothing at all. In the end, she chose something in between. "I experienced severe disorientation, possibly due to environmental factors I don't fully understand," Isabella said. "There may be magnetic anomalies or other geological features in that drainage that interfere with equipment and human perception. I recommend the area be closed until a thorough geological survey can be conducted." It was a compromise. Not the truth, but not entirely a lie. Enough to protect others without destroying her credibility. The board accepted her recommendation. The Whisper Creek drainage was closed to public access, marked as a geological hazard area. Andrew Holloway was officially declared deceased, his remains unrecovered. Isabella was granted medical leave to deal with what the board's psychologist termed trauma-related stress disorder. But Isabella knew she couldn't return to search and rescue, couldn't return to a career built on the assumption that reality followed rules, that measurements meant something, that her frameworks for understanding the world were reliable. She'd seen too much, understood too much, or rather understood that she'd never understood anything at all. She transferred to a desk job, working with historical park records and archive management. Safe, boring work that kept her far from the wilderness and the thin places where reality grew strange. But sometimes late at night, she would pull up topographical maps of Cascade Peaks National Park on her computer screen, would zoom in on the Whisper Creek drainage, on that small blue line of water running through dense forest, on the white space that represented terrain too remote for detailed satellite imagery. And she would wonder if Andrew, or what remained of Andrew, was still there, still leaving trail markers, still trying in whatever way he could to help future victims find their way out of the impossible geometry of that patient, ancient place. Isabella would never go back, but she would remember, would carry the knowledge that beneath every measurement, every framework, every attempt to understand and classify the world, lurked something vast and strange and utterly indifferent to human comprehension. The forest had been patient with her, had shown her just enough to break her certainty without breaking her mind. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the shadows fell in directions that almost seemed wrong, Isabella would hear footsteps outside her apartment, steady, measured footsteps that circled but never approached. And she would know that the forest hadn't entirely released her after all, that she remained, in some way she couldn't measure or quantify, still connected to that place where reality bent and broke and showed its true face. The forest was patient, and it was waiting. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most?